What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? The Rihanna American story. A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s, got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it, he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him, after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. There have been several confirmed cases in a few different countries of people living in other people's houses unbeknownst to them. I believe one case went on for a couple of years. The intruder would wait until the homeowner would go to work and then sneak out and steal small amounts of food as not to be noticed. Well, eventually the homeowner did notice and couldn't figure out where his food was going, so he set up a hidden camera to record it. I can only imagine how scary it would have been to come home from work one night and sit down to watch the video, skipping through hours of stillness, to suddenly come across a person crawling out of your attic. And then the slow realization that that person is still in your house at that moment. And then the retroactive fear of thinking back to all the times you laid awake at night and heard a noise which you just dismissed as coming from the pipes or the old wooden beams, but actually it was a fucking person just above you. It gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I think about it. I was a director of my college's student government. There was this dude who was always willing to take on projects, so I gave him lots of stuff. I remember thinking he was very charismatic and well dressed, and when he told me he owned a startup clothing company, I bought some stuff from his website. It was typical for student government kids to end up at the same parties, and I ran into him several times outside of committee. I was studying abroad my senior year, and I was here on Reddit. Saw an article with the guy's face on it. Turns out he raped 12 girls at my university. It was apparently well known, but because his father was a dean wealthy professor, it kept getting swept under the rug. Apparently he was using extracurriculars like the student government to keep coming back to campus after he had been removed from his classes. Lived W3 other girls sophomore year of college. All three took off early for spring break, leaving me alone in the house. First night alone, I heard someone bang on my front door at 2 AM. Then I hear more knocks at the back door. A man yells, "Boulder police, open the door." When I didn't, I heard body slams against both doors. Soon I hear, "Little girl, open the door, we know you're alone." At this point I'm so scared I keep accidentally dialing 611 instead of 911. When I eventually do get the police, cars roll up, thankfully, just minutes later. Officers have 4 boys from our school hockey team face down on the grass. I had to file restraining orders against them, and the kicker, one lived across the street from me, and we'd never spoken a single word before then. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friends told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kid and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened, and afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. I was in class in 10th grade and the teacher was asking everyone how their weekend was. The quietest girl in the class spoke, and while breaking down in tears, said she was on a trip in the mountains with her mom. They made a stop for some reason and she looked over the cliff and saw an overturned vehicle with a dead family scattered about. One day as a kid I was exploring the forests near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars, Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kinda steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl in that forest. A guy walking his dog found it after the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater while staring at the backpack. We stopped exploring the forests after. The lake bottom murders are scary as hell. Like, there are 4 teens who go on a camping trip in Finland. The next morning, 3 of the teens are found murdered, and one of them is almost dead and severely injured, but survived. No one knows who the murderer is today. 44 years later, the 4th teen, Nils, who survived, was accused of murdering them and gets sent to prison. But then he was released a year later because there was little DNA evidence to prove this, and no good evidence to prove that he murdered them at all. However, there is circumstantial evidence such as he allegedly fought his one friend due to an argument and was drunk. Some say this cold ended in accidental and/or intentional murder. However, I personally highly doubt that Nils is guilty. I couldn't find much information on who Nils thought the murderer was. So my thoughts are 1. It's too traumatic for him to remember, or 2. He didn't recognize the person. Some other key suspects include the manager of the camp, who was known for being quite hostile, an ice cream vendor who admitted to the crime on his deathbed, and a man who lived only a short distance from the camp who claimed to be in Germany during that time. However, there is much doubt for his claim. There was a sketch released of the alleged murderer, who seems to be an unsettling picture of an older man. And you can find a photo of the man, who looks like the guy in the sketch, attending a police speech. Edit: I added some information that I missed from this case based on the replies to this, and edited some information I seem to have been off on. Much thanks to everyone for adding more info, and also much thanks to anyone who corrected me. I made sure to double check my post now to make sure all my information is correct. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake. That is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. I'm not sure I remember all the details correctly, but anyway. A guy was cleaning a giant cooking tank at a tuna factory. It was so big that he had to climb all the way in. Someone else didn't check, and protocol was broken along the way somewhere. Second guy locked the barrel and turned it on, cooking the guy inside alive. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk, so he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife. One of my friends was drugged by a nice-seeming girl at a bar that tried to sex traffic her. The girl got her an Uber to an address she didn't know under the guise of "get my drunk friend home," but she woke up on the way and told the driver she didn't know where they were going. They called the cops. Apparently that wasn't the first time that week they'd heard the same story and they recognized the address as one they were already tracking. If she hadn't woken up on the way she might have been trafficked by now. Apparently they use younger, safe-seeming girls to do the collecting a lot of the time. Co-worker's dad was babysitting his baby boy for him. At one point, Grandad went into the nursery to check on the baby and found that he'd somehow reached for the window blind strap and tangled himself up in it to the point where he was choking. Baby was already blue and all of the veins in his face had popped. Grandpa frantically dialed 911. IMS was there in 2 to 3 minutes, and they brought the little fellow back to life, and he's okay now. Edit: wow, you guys really blew this up overnight for me. For the parents here freaking out, really, check to see how close to the crib any hanging cords like this are. When they brought the little guy to the hospital, they separated and questioned the parents and grandpa over and over like they were suspected of doing this on purpose. Of course, it got sorted out as a true accident. The child is now in his 20s and all is well with him. When I worked in healthcare, I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department, he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly, he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. Back in the 70s, some friends and I planned a camping trip to Northern Cali for a long weekend. We packed up and headed north on the highway. Somewhere around Bakersfield, we picked up a hitchhiker headed to Kernville, who we dropped off before heading further north. So we get to our campsite and start getting things set up. My GF finds a note tucked into the top of her backpack. It read, "I could have killed all of you." None of us slept that night. When I was about 8 years old, our school was doing swimming lessons as part of the curriculum. My mum worked late, so we went to after school care and didn't get home until after dark. When we got home, mum asked me to take my wet togs, bathing suit, and towel out to the clothes line to dry so I could use them the next day. I was so confident going outside to do this and had this real feeling of being a big kid. I walked into our backyard only for a man to be running at me. I screamed, jumped inside and instinctively locked the back door as I did so. As this was happening, my mum told me she heard the guy jump the gate, which was next to her bedroom, just after she heard me scream and came running to find me. I slept with the light on until I was 16, and I get my husband to go outside for me while it's dark. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to consider the idea to maybe think about potentially subscribing. Peace.